I got into my husband's car and found a tube of personal lubricant in the glove compartment. I didn't say a word. I just secretly replaced it with industrial superglue. And what happened next forced our neighbors to make an emergency call to the fire department. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it's traveled. The velvet silence in the house, heavy and suffocating like a forgotten tapestry, was the first thing to greet me. I sat in the grand study, the silence a constant, unwelcome companion that had long replaced genuine conversation. The mahogany grandfather clock, a priceless family heirloom and a marker of 45 years of marriage, tolled with a slow, accusatory chime. Each deep beat was a chilling reminder of a life that was now revealing itself to be a meticulously gilded forgery. My husband, George, a man of 72 and a celebrated figure in the exclusive world of rare European antiquity appraisal, had just returned from what he vaguely termed a crucial acquisition summit. He looked less like a successful collector and more like a man shackled by an unbearable secret, his face a ruin of fatigue and something far darker than mere travel weariness. The lines around his hawk-like eyes and tight mouth were new, deep chasms of deceit. He tossed his bespoke tweed jacket onto a Louis XIV chaise longue with a weariness that felt dramatically overdone, fumbled with his silk cravat as if it were a hangman's knot, and slumped onto the bed, the antique springs protesting his weight, without even the pretense of a cleansing shower. The lingering trace of his costly sandalwood cologne was aggressively polluted by a new, audacious scent, a sharp, cheap citrus and jasmine fragrance, a blatant confession from a low-rent affair. Minutes later, the raspy drone of his snoring filled the air, a sound that once felt like the anchor of our home but now mocked me, a lullaby for a woman who was clearly a fool. I rose, moving with the stiff, practiced elegance of a 78-year-old wife well-versed in maintaining a fragile facade, and began to tidy the mess he'd created in the adjacent sitting room. His wallet, his keys, his heavily encrypted tablet, and his personal phone lay scattered. The phone's screen was alight, a notification glowing like a toxic bloom, a new encrypted message. I frowned. George prided himself on his technological aloofness, always insisting, "Eleanor, this digital nonsense is beneath true intellectual pursuit. I prefer a face-to-face negotiation." Yet, here was a digital missive, demanding attention. It lay exposed, a ghostly trail of a hidden life. A cold, necessary curiosity compelled me. With a thumb that barely trembled, I opened the secure application. The message was devastatingly concise, a shard of ice shattering my world. "That appraisal was incredible, Dad. Your legacy will be ours soon." Blackheart, the word "Dad" hung in the air, a cruel echo. Who addressed him with such intimate, proprietary affection? And the dark heart emoji, a symbol of a bond one clearly no longer shared. I swiped down, my vision blurring, searching for context, but the user profile was masked, a meaningless string of characters offering only deeper confusion and fear. It felt as if a glacial draft had whistled through the sealed doors of my life, exposing a hidden vault of treachery. I glanced at the master bedroom. George shifted, his breathing deep and peaceful, a furious contrast to the maelstrom ripping through my chest. My heart hammered, a frantic, guilty percussion, but I gently placed the phone back, my hands steadier than I felt, driven by a survival instinct forged over a lifetime of high-stakes dealings in the antique world. I continued my mechanical cleanup, gathering his expensive tailored trousers for the laundry. In the interior pocket, my fingers brushed a piece of crisp, unfamiliar paper, a dated receipt from the exclusive, the Sarcophagus, Gallery and Auction House in Charleston. Charleston. He had told me he was finalizing the details of a Ming Dynasty vase in Savannah. A bitter, silent laugh escaped my lips. George loathed Savannah, the humidity ruined his suits. Charleston, however, was where he had discovered his career-defining peace, a fact he frequently reminded me of. With whom had he spent the day at an auction house while clearly lying about his location? The receipt indicated a purchase, a mid-level, unsigned Byzantine icon, and a remarkably expensive, vintage Bordeaux, the very bottle he'd bought to toast the successful launch of my first major collection exhibit. That memory, once a treasured vignette, now felt like a faded, deceitful photograph. I pulled out my own secure mobile device and, with grim resolve, photographed the receipt and the screen of the encrypted message. The instinct of a 78-year-old wife, hardened by decades of navigating wealth and influence, is a profound, survivalist knowing. Something catastrophic was unfolding, and I needed hard proof. My hands were shaking, not just from fury, but from a profound existential terror. I felt poised on the precipice of a cliff, watching the spectacular, final collapse of my life. Wait until you see what the icon purchase really meant. It was the secret key to his entire plan. Keep reading to find out why this single item was his undoing. ***, I went to the garage. George's armored Mercedes-Benz S-Class was still radiating heat, the air heavy with the aroma of high-octane fuel and that intrusive sweet perfume. I opened the door, a small, cold dread coiling in my stomach. Turning on my phone's lamp, I scoured the driver's area, only loose change and discarded mineral water bottles. But as I reached into the glove compartment, my fingers snagged on something plastic and slick. I retrieved it. A used tube of personal lubricant, the cap crusted with dried residue, a sticky, irrefutable artifact of infidelity. We hadn't shared physical intimacy in nearly 10 years. He always cited the demands of his career and his age-related slowdown. So, for what purpose was this tube employed? The question hammered against my fragile composure. I was paralyzed, yet a steely clarity, the hallmark of a woman who built her own empire, kicked in. I returned the tube precisely as I'd found it. Then, I scoured my hands with an alcohol wipe, scrubbing them until they were raw, as if the touch of his betrayal could leave a tangible stain on my skin. I continued my methodical search. Tucked beneath the back seat, I found several crumpled napkins, saturated with that defiant, alien citrus jasmine scent, a loud, vulgar proclamation of his unfaithfulness in the quiet sanctity of our garage. I captured images of everything, the damning lubricant, the telltale napkins, as if I could digitally record the very scent of his deception. I closed the car and retreated inside, the weight of this concrete evidence pressing down on me like a granite slab. Sitting in the study, my hands now uncontrollably shaking, I revisited George's phone. By now, the certainty of his affair was absolute. I checked his professional communications, only cold, dry exchanges concerning art storage and insurance valuations. His secure message inbox, apart from that one sinister note, was a vacuum. Sent and archived folders were empty. Everything was suspiciously pristine, as if he had performed a surgical erasure of his tracks. A master deceiver, I thought, bile rising in my throat. My rage had crystallized into a hard, cold core, and a more lethal emotion began to stir, the burning necessity for truth, a desperate need to expose the lie, regardless of the fallout. The next morning, as the pale dawn light tentatively filtered through the silk drapes, I was already awake, a ghost haunting my own luxurious estate. The image of the lubricant, the Charleston receipt, the encrypted message, a venomous carousel of doubt, spun ceaselessly in my mind. I was in the kitchen, mechanically preparing breakfast, steel-cut oats, fresh berries, and a cup of the strong French press coffee George preferred. I had barely slept. He descended the stairs, looking haggard, his usually immaculate silver hair slightly disheveled. He sat down, took a sip of his coffee, and immediately set it back down. "I have an extremely sensitive appraisal today, Eleanor," he announced, a rehearsed drone he'd used countless times, his eyes meticulously avoiding mine. "It's a major client. I'm sure I'll be detained quite late." His casual fabrication, the easy glide into deceit, sent a shiver of pure malice down my spine. I nodded, forcing a strained, wifely smile, biting back the urge to scream, "Which client? In Charleston again?" I held the rage in check, a silent, internal fire, and simply replied, "Very well, darling. Do be careful navigating the traffic." He rose, offered a cursory pat on my shoulder as if I were a piece of furniture, and left. The heavy oak door closed, leaving the kitchen in an echoing silence, and me with a suspicion rapidly morphing into monstrous certainty. I cleared the breakfast things, the routine of washing the fine china a small, grounding anchor in the hurricane of my emotions. I couldn't simply sit here and invent scenarios. I required proof, undeniable evidence. I retrieved my mobile and located the contact from Mrs. Du Bois, a close associate from my years on the board of the Metropolitan Museum. Years ago, she had quietly offered me the name of an exceptionally discreet private investigator specializing in high-net-worth marital due diligence. Eleanor, she'd advised over dry martinis, if you ever feel the earth shifting beneath your feet, call Mr. Sterling. He's reliable and knows how to keep the dirt swept under the Persian rug. I had never envisioned needing such a service, but now there was no other path. I dialed her number, my voice tight. Hello, Celeste. Could you possibly remind me of Mr. Sterling's contact information? I have a rather delicate matter. The pause on her end spoke volumes, a pregnant silence only old friends can share. Eleanor, what is going on? Is George acting up? I sighed, unwilling to debase myself with details over the phone. I simply need clarity, Celeste. Can you help? Mrs. Du Bois, a woman of immense discretion, agreed instantly. An hour later, a message arrived from Mr. Thomas Sterling, requesting a meeting at noon at the venerable, the Gilded Cup, coffee house downtown. Mrs. Roberts, the message read, please be assured, I will handle this with the utmost discretion. You will have your answers. The brevity of the note was a small, vital lifeline in my suffocating sea of treachery. At noon, I arrived at the cafe, a richly paneled space with worn leather seats and the comforting, dark aroma of aged coffee, a scent that now felt strangely foreign. I chose a secluded booth, a shadow among the lunchtime crowd. Mr. Sterling entered, a trim man in his late 60s, clad in a simple charcoal suit, his observant, world-weary eyes seeming to register every detail in the room. I handed him a small, encrypted data stick containing the images, the message, the Charleston receipt, the lubricant tube, and the napkins. This is all I have, I whispered, my voice raw. I believe my husband is planning not just an affair, but a financial attack on my collection. The words tasted like ash. Mr. Sterling nodded, scrolling through the images on his secure device, his face a professional mask. He carefully transcribed notes into a small, leather-bound book. Mrs. Roberts, I understand. I will initiate surveillance on Mr. Roberts this afternoon. Do not be alarmed. I will contact you with any developments as soon as is feasible. I looked at him, desperately holding back the sudden sting of tears. Thank you, I managed. I only require the absolute truth, whatever its cost. He gave me a look of deep, professional sympathy. I will do my level best. Please, return home and maintain your usual routine. We must not alert him to your suspicions. I left the cafe and walked through the busy city, a profound, chilling loneliness settling over me. 45 years of marriage, a legacy built on the bedrock of trust, was crumbling beneath my feet. George was my rock, my supposed protector in the ruthless antique market. And here I was, hiring a total stranger to shadow my own husband. The irony was a bitter, poisoned chalice. You won't believe the connection between George's icon purchase and the first photo Thomas sent. Was he planning to steal priceless art? Stick around. Asterisk that night, as I sat in my private atelier, the air smelling of aged parchment and polishing wax, a familiar, soothing presence, reviewing inventory ledgers, my secure phone vibrated. A message from Mr. Sterling. I snatched it up, my heart hammering like a blacksmith's hammer. It was a photograph, George, in his usual light gray suit, entering a spectacularly ornate, Baroque restaurant in the company of a woman. I zoomed in, and my breath caught. It was Lydia, my daughter-in-law, the wife of my son, Daniel. She was wearing a sleek, low-cut emerald dress, heavy, provocative makeup, and her usually restrained hair was cascading down her back. They were not walking like in-laws. They were intertwined, a couple sharing an intimate, profound secret. Their bodies angled towards each other, a palpable sense of collusion radiating from the image. I slumped back into my chair, the phone trembling in my hand. Lydia. How was this unholy alliance possible? At all family gatherings, she and George maintained a cool, almost distant formality. Now I saw it was an Oscar-worthy performance, a masterclass of deceit played out for my benefit. Mr. Sterling sent more images. In one, they were seated at a secluded corner table, bathed in candlelight, Lydia leaning in, her face radiant with a joy I had not seen her share with Daniel. George was raising his glass, his gaze towards her one of unnerving tenderness. I felt a crushing, agonizing pain in my chest. For 45 years, I had never once seen him look at me like that, not even when we were young, when I was the bold young Eleanor from Boston, with a fierce passion for antiquities. That look, a look of genuine adoration and possessive love, was now exclusively Lydia's. Later, deep into the night, a video file arrived from Mr. Sterling. The grandfather clock on the wall chimed 2 solemn notes. I slipped on my secure headphones, a desperate, final attempt to contain the poison, and pressed play, my hands barely managing to hold the phone. In the shaky, distant footage, Lydia leaned close to George's ear, whispering something that made him roar with an unfamiliar, liberated laughter. Her eyes sparked under the dim restaurant light. They stood, and George, the quintessential gentleman, opened the car door for her, the gesture of a devoted lover. I replayed the video ceaselessly, a form of self-inflicted, necessary torture. Each frame was a fresh, brutal stab to my heart. Lydia, my daughter-in-law, whom I had taught the nuances of identifying true Roman glass, and George, the man to whom I had dedicated my entire life and career. What unspeakable plot were they executing behind Daniel's back? The questions were a lethal undertow, threatening to drag me under. I transferred all photos and the video to my data stick, meticulously noting every detail, date, time, location, even the brand of wine visible on the table. My actions were purely automatic, my mind a churning chaos. I refused to accept that George and Lydia were capable of this level of depravity. Yet, the evidence was undeniable, a mountain of proof of their grotesque betrayal. I remained in my solitary atelier, surrounded by objects of immense value, but feeling utterly worthless. I remembered the early days, when George and I had worked late into the night, cataloging pieces, dreaming of our future collection. Now, it was all a distant, malicious fabrication. And that infamous Byzantine icon on the Charleston receipt? You'll gasp when you learn what it really was. Keep reading, the stakes are higher than you think. The next morning, I stood in the small, climate-controlled space I called my atelier, surrounded by the tranquil presence of priceless history. The air, usually soothingly scented with fine wood and old paper, felt empty. As I finished cataloging an invoice for a large gallery shipment, my secure phone vibrated in the pocket of my velvet work apron. I wiped my hands on a cloth, my heart plummeting when I saw the caller ID, Mr. Sterling. I took a deep, steadying breath. A new series of photos appeared on the screen. The first showed George in his familiar, bespoke charcoal suit, emerging from a highly discreet, old-money law firm near the financial district. Beside him was Lydia, in an austere beige sheath dress, her hair pulled back into a severe ponytail, partially obscured by enormous, dark designer sunglasses, a pathetic attempt at anonymity. They walked intimately close, not like relatives, but like co-conspirators, their bodies a testament to a forbidden, shared agenda. In the next photo, they stood before a gleaming, copper-domed building, a recognized notary and appraisal consortium known for handling high-value estate transfers. I zoomed in, desperate for any detail that might allow me to deny the truth, but they looked too natural, too comfortable together, moving as one unit in a world from which I was clearly excluded. Then came a short, silent video clip from Mr. Sterling. I pressed play, the blood roaring in my ears like the sound of an approaching firestorm. The perspective was distant, but clear enough to distinguish George and Lydia on the third-floor balcony of a historic hotel annex. His arm was casually draped around her waist, her head was resting on his shoulder, her long hair catching the morning sun. And then, like a lightning strike to the soul, I watched them share a sharp, intimate kiss, without the slightest attempt to conceal the gesture. It was fleeting, yet it was enough to incinerate the last vestige of hope within me. I replayed the video, image by agonizing image, a self-inflicted descent into the deepest hell. The curtain in the room behind them shifted, and Lydia quickly turned, embracing George, her face radiant with a happiness that should have been mine. I sank onto a low, antique stool, clutching the workbench to keep from collapsing. Mr. Sterling's text followed. They have rented the suite for the entire day. It appears they are finalizing documents. I am maintaining surveillance. I reread the message until the words blurred. Just hours earlier, George had sent me a text, Eleanor, I will not be home this evening. Must finalize the terms for the Roman sculpture acquisition out of town. Rest well. The tone was caring, routine, the mask of a loyal husband maintained for 45 years. But now I knew it was all an elaborate scaffolding of lies. The Roman sculpture was a lie, the out of town was a lie. He was here, in a luxury suite, with our daughter-in-law. I opened my hardened professional drive and meticulously saved every single photo and video clip. Every save click felt like driving another nail into the coffin of my marriage. In the video, George's gaze towards Lydia was so deeply tender. The way he lightly stroked her hair reminded me of how he used to caress mine, decades ago, when we were young and I foolishly believed our love was as timeless as the artifacts we collected. Now, all I saw was callous, calculated betrayal. I remembered family events, the lavish holiday parties we hosted. Lydia always kept a careful distance from George. Daniel once joked, "Mother, I think Lydia finds father's lectures unbearable. She avoids him like a curator avoids cheap reproductions." I had believed it, believing their awkwardness was merely a clash of personalities. Now I understood it was a carefully synchronized farce, a brilliant performance staged for me, for Daniel, for our entire esteemed social circle. I felt like the ultimate fool, a blind matriarch betrayed by the two people closest to me, operating in plain sight. Mr. Sterling's silent camera had captured the devastating moment, an indelible snapshot of my shattered reality. I replied, "Thank you. Continue the surveillance. I need to know every detail." His brief reply, affirmative. Maintain composure. You need to see the documents they were signing on that balcony. It's not a will, it's far worse. Keep reading to find out the real value of the so-called icon. That evening, I returned to the magnificent estate that had been my sanctuary with George. Now it felt hostile, a place of ghosts and virulent lies. I went to my private safe, the one concealed behind a heavy Renaissance portrait, and retrieved a thick manila envelope, my movements driven by cold, rigid determination. I printed every piece of evidence, the photos of George and Lydia leaving the law firm, entering the hotel, the damning balcony footage, and every clear frame of the close-up video. I carefully stacked them, sealed the envelope, and tucked it into a false-bottom drawer within my antique writing desk, beneath a stack of old, sentimental letters from my own late mother. I picked up a framed photo of the four of us, George, Lydia, Daniel, and me, at a recent charity gala. Lydia was smiling radiantly, clinging to Daniel's arm, while George stood next to me, his hand proprietarily on my shoulder, looking every inch the proud husband. Now, looking at that image, I wanted nothing more than to shred it into irreparable fragments, to obliterate the smiling deceit from my life. Shortly before dawn, I heard the heavy front door creak open slowly. George stumbled in, smelling strongly of expensive single-malt whiskey. The negotiations were brutal, Eleanor, he slurred, his voice raspy, his eyes bloodshot, as if he'd been awake for 48 hours straight. Had to over-imbibe with the client. I'm utterly exhausted. I stood in the kitchen, a glass of water in my hand, watching his pathetic performance, feeling as if he were deliberately grinding salt into my fresh wound. Rest now, I replied, my voice calm, the perfect timbre of the dutiful wife. You have a full day of appraisals tomorrow. He nodded, offered a cursory pat on my shoulder as if I were a piece of furniture, and dragged his weary body towards the master bedroom. Within minutes, the heavy sound of his contented snoring filled the house, the sound of a man who believed his deceptions were impenetrable. When I was absolutely certain George was asleep, my phone vibrated. It was a call from Mr. Sterling. His voice was hushed, a low, urgent whisper, as if he feared the very air might betray him. Mrs. Roberts, I successfully recorded a crucial segment of their conversation as they were leaving the hotel parking structure. I utilized specialized parabolic equipment. They were completely unaware. I am sending the audio file now. My heart hammered, but my voice remained steady. Thank you, Thomas. Send the file immediately. Moments later, an audio file appeared in my encrypted messages. I put on my headphones, sat at the study desk, and pressed play. The first voice was Lydia's, cold, hard, and frighteningly ambitious, a stranger's voice. George, you must expedite the transfer of those holding contracts. I want that entire portfolio of early American silver finalized and out of the house. That pathetic old fool, Eleanor, must be completely marginalized. The air left my lungs. I gripped the desk edge. Then came George's voice, deep and chillingly confident. Do not concern yourself with the contracts, my dear. Eleanor suspects nothing. She trusts my expert advice too much. It is entirely under control. It was more than a knife twisting in my heart, it was a wrecking ball to my entire existence. They weren't just engaged in a tawdry affair, they were systematically plotting to steal my entire collection, the legacy I had built through decades of relentless work, the early American silver portfolio that was my pride and my major retirement asset. George had never understood its intrinsic value, never got his hands dirty in the grueling work of authentication and acquisition. And now he and Lydia wanted to strip me of everything. I almost shattered, but my iron will held. I copied the audio file immediately to the data stick, meticulously documenting the date and time, focusing on the mechanical task to keep my mind from dissolving. The real plot is more sinister than just stealing a collection. Keep reading to understand why they were using a notary and what role my son, Daniel, plays in this grotesque scheme. **** The next morning, as I prepared a detailed inventory list for an important gallery client, my phone vibrated again. Mr. Sterling sent another series of photos, captured with a powerful telephoto lens. They showed George and Lydia inside his secure Mercedes, with a thick stack of legal documents spread between them. Lydia held a red marking pen, fiercely annotating the papers. George sat beside her, nodding, smiling, clearly in full, vile agreement. Mr. Sterling's text read, I overheard part of the conversation. They appear to be utilizing a contact within the notary's office to execute a fraudulent power of attorney. This is a deliberate, legal attempt to seize your assets. I zoomed in on the photo. I could not decipher the text on the documents, but I knew with devastating certainty, these were not benign business contracts. They were meticulously planning to steal every asset I had worked for, step by calculated step. I sat there, surrounded by the luminous beauty of my collection, yet feeling like my world was dissolving into dust. I put on my headphones and listened to the audio file again, hearing every cruel word they spoke. That pathetic old fool. That was Lydia's descriptor for me. I remembered taking her under my wing when she married Daniel, teaching her the difference between real Georgian silver and cheap reproduction, embracing her as the daughter I never had. And George, the man who had vowed eternal fidelity under the soaring ceilings of a historic Boston cathedral, was now my betrayer. They had made a mockery of me, a blind wife who still believed in the sanctity of family. Mrs. Albright, a fellow collector and a good friend, stopped by my atelier. Eleanor, the buzz is all about your new acquisition, the early American silver portfolio. It's magnificent. You're brilliant to have secured it. I forced a tight, professional smile. Thank you, Clara. I do my best. But inside, I was a wreck. I wondered what she would think if she knew the truth. Would she still see me as a brilliant, strong woman, or just a pathetic fool betrayed by the two people closest to her? I saw Mrs. Albright out and retreated to my study, pressing my palms against my temples. No tears came. Instead, a cold, silent, surgical rage began to solidify within me, an internal furnace ready to ignite and consume them both. The rage is building. You won't believe the audacious plan Eleanor hatches to use the one thing George cherishes, his car, against him. Keep reading to the point of no return. **** That evening, during our meticulously choreographed dinner in the grand dining room, I sat across from George under the cold, crystalline light of the chandelier. He ate his perfectly prepared meal and spoke in the irritating monotone of a man convinced of his own brilliance. "Eleanor, I will have some extremely complex partnership documents for you to review this week. They relate to the trust structure of the silver portfolio. I suggest you simply skim them. They are dreadfully dry and highly technical." He wanted me to wave him through. I picked up a delicate antique fork and pretended to eat, but in my mind, I only heard Lydia's sharp voice. "Hurry up and finalize those holding contracts." I knew he was testing the waters, trying to rope me into his scheme by making me a passive participant in my own ruin. I gave him a brittle smile, the perfect facade of a wife too weary to argue, and replied, "Yes, darling, I'll certainly glance at them. Perhaps later in the week. I'm quite exhausted now." He nodded, sipped his vintage port, maintaining his look of benign concern. But I saw the calculating gleam behind his eyes. He was a predator, waiting for the optimal moment to strike. George had several more glasses of port, his face flushed, and he began to loudly complain about a difficult appraisal client he'd had to suit that day. I nodded, feigning attention, but inside I was screaming, "Do you really believe I am this simple?" When he finally rose, swaying slightly, and went to the bedroom, he carelessly tossed his keys onto his bedside table, the heavy key fob for his Mercedes-Benz S-Class, gleaming under the soft lamp. A silent, irresistible lure. This was my moment. I stared at the keys, my heart slamming against my ribs. I moved silently into the bedroom, taking care not to disturb his heavy, alcohol-induced sleep. Every step was a careful, deliberate passage from my painful past towards my frightening, inevitable future. I seized the key fob, gripping the cold metal tightly, and moved straight to the garage. The night was utterly still, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the estate security system. I switched on my phone's torch. The weak light revealed the sleek, dark form of George's armored Mercedes, the silent, chrome-plated accomplice to his betrayal. I opened the glove compartment, and there it was, the tube of personal lubricant, a silent monument to their sordid little secret. I took it out. It was clear they had used it again, a confirmation that George and Lydia were still brazenly celebrating their twisted game. I carried the tube to my private work area, placing it on a steel surface, and vigorously scrubbed my hands with industrial cleaner, attempting to erase the memory of the object's touch. I opened a utility drawer and retrieved a small, unassuming bottle of industrial-grade polymer superglue, the same resin I used for critical, high-stress antique repairs. It was a tool of my preservation trade, now repurposed as a devastating weapon of revenge. I carefully unscrewed the lubricant cap and, using a syringe, slowly and deliberately filled the entire tube with the clear, fast-setting superglue. I wiped the nozzle meticulously, shook it gently to homogenize the mixture, and tested a minute droplet. It extruded smoothly, perfectly mimicking the original lubricant. No one would ever suspect the chilling truth hidden inside. I permitted myself a faint, grim smile, though the chaos inside me was volcanic. This was not a game. This was the first, critical, irreversible step towards justice. I returned the doctored tube to the glove compartment, precisely arranging the contents and the floor mats back into their original, impeccable positions before closing the door. I checked the trunk, a final, chilling inspection. There was nothing significant, only a discarded silk scarf, not my fragrance, and an unused, sealed package of 2 condoms, evidence of their preparedness. I photographed it instantly, adding the image to my growing, damning dossier. Back inside, I replaced the keys beside George's digital clock. I went to the main study, picked up a volume of obscure European history, and pretended to read. The dim light illuminated the pages, but I saw none of the words. I could only see Daniel, my son, who still believed he had a happy life and a secure future. How could I ever force him to face the grotesque truth, that his father and his wife were engaged in this foul plot? I thought of my silver portfolio, the 45 years of labor, the sleepless nights spent authenticating and negotiating. George had never truly respected my ambition, but I trusted his loyalty. Now I knew he was merely waiting to seize everything. But he did not know that his downfall had already been initiated. The trap is set. Now Eleanor must make her move to catch them in the most humiliating act possible. keep reading to see her brilliant alibi plan. Asterisk asterisk at dawn, I rose. The sunlight was a timid, pale intrusion through the thick window glass. I was in my atelier, preparing a highly delicate stabilizing compound for a fragile piece of porcelain. I mixed the resin with a precise, furious energy, channeling my raw, cold rage into every action. When I returned to the kitchen for coffee, I maintained my air of calm. George was already awake, sipping his French press. "George," I said, my voice steady, "I have to travel immediately to Richmond tomorrow. There is a sudden, critical opportunity to secure a colonial-era document collection. I will need to sign the paperwork immediately. I will undoubtedly be delayed." I watched him closely. He looked up, a fleeting flicker of surprise giving way to a sickening, immediate relief. "A crucial contract?" he asked, taking my hand with feigned concern. "My dear, you must go. Don't worry. I'll ensure everything here is secure." That small, telltale spark in his eye, that almost imperceptible curve of his lip, the weight of my presence had been lifted. He wanted me gone. I knew precisely why. I smiled, giving him a quick, dismissive nod. "Thank you, darling. I will call if the acquisition goes late." He took a deep drink of his coffee, then rose, claiming an early start was necessary for his appraisal schedule. As he left, I saw he'd carelessly left his phone on the counter. The screen lit up with a missed, incoming call. The name made my heart seize, LYD's Trust, Mobile. I was right. It was her. Before I could even touch the phone, George returned, grabbing it with a hurried, guilty jerk, shutting off the screen immediately. "Forgot this," he mumbled, forcing a strained, unnatural smile. And he was gone. I stood there, watching the heavy door close, feeling the cold weight of the slap across my face. He wasn't even trying to conceal it anymore. I spent the day working like an automaton, signing documents, calling clients, smiling professionally. But my mind was entirely focused on George and Lydia. I could not let their grotesque charade continue. I needed one final, undeniable piece of evidence, straight from their own lips. That night, I played the part of the exhausted wife. I went to bed early and told George, "I must be up before sunrise to catch the early transport to Richmond, so I'm retiring early." He nodded, gave me his usual perfunctory pat. "Rest well, Eleanor. Good luck with the acquisition." I lay down, closing my eyes, but my hearing was acutely tuned to every sound in the house. Close to midnight, when George's heavy snoring ceased, I heard him carefully ease himself out of bed. The faint glow of his phone illuminated the room. He left, holding the device close, convinced I was in a deep sleep. I remained still, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Then, I slid silently out of bed and followed him. I hid behind the heavy velvet curtain in the grand hall and watched him stand in a dark corner near the tall window. He raised the phone to his ear and spoke softly. "Yes, darling. Of course. Come directly to the house tomorrow. No need for the hotel suite. Eleanor has left for her critical acquisition out of town and won't return until late. The house is entirely ours." I heard a low, throaty giggle from the other end, Lydia's sweet, saccharine voice. "That's wonderful, George. We can finally relax. I'll be there early." George chuckled. "Yes, my dear. I will be waiting." I stood frozen behind the curtain, my blood boiling. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning to desecrate my home, the sanctuary I shared with Daniel, turning it into their vile meeting place. I crept back into the bedroom, opened a concealed panel in my wardrobe, and retrieved Daniel's old, professional-grade audio recorder, the one he used for high-quality interviews in his fire chief role. I checked the battery, inserted a fresh micro-SD card, and set it to continuous loop recording. I meticulously concealed it behind the heavy, brocade drapery, directly behind the headboard, ensuring the tiny microphone was perfectly positioned. I adjusted the cable and covered the slight bulge with a large, ornate frame, a wedding photo of Daniel and Lydia. Looking at the photo, the bitter taste returned. Her beaming smile, George's paternal hug. All of it a vicious, calculated lie. I double-checked the recorder. It was active. I placed the frame perfectly to mask the cable. Then, I climbed back into bed, pretending to be asleep. George returned, threw himself down, and immediately resumed snoring. But my eyes were wide open in the dark, sharper, clearer than ever. I set my alarm for an hour earlier than necessary. I closed my eyes, not for sleep, but for the final, necessary preparations. The final trap is laid. Eleanor is about to play a dangerous game that involves fire, the police, and a very public humiliation. Keep reading to see her masterpiece of revenge unfold. I woke up at 5 a.m. The house was silent, the only light the faint, gray intrusion from the streetlights. I was in the kitchen, a cold, half-empty cup of coffee in my hand, staring at the small, antique spirit lamp I had placed on the counter. It was the final element of my plan, a simple, brilliant decoy, enough to create a catastrophic appearance of fire. I tied a piece of almost invisible fishing line to the wick of the spirit lamp. I ran the line across the counter, through a tiny, pre-drilled hole in the window frame, and attached it to a heavy, weighted object, an antique bronze doorstop I'd found in the basement. I only had to pull the line remotely, and the lamp, placed beneath a small pile of highly flammable, oil-soaked rags, would ignite, sending a plume of thick, noxious black smoke high into the air, more than enough to alarm the entire neighborhood. I carefully opened the kitchen window a sliver to ensure the smoke had a direct, visible exit. I tested the mechanism once, pulling the line sharply. The small, controlled flame leaped up instantly, and a wisp of smoke spiraled towards the opening. I extinguished it immediately, checked everything for traces, ensuring George would never be suspicious. I put on my coat, grabbed my large, professional satchel, and played the part of the departing businesswoman. Before I left, I went into the bedroom and lightly shook George. "I must leave for the transport hub now, darling," I said calmly. "The colonial document acquisition awaits. I anticipate a very late return." He opened his eyes, mumbled a sleepy, "Be careful, Eleanor. Call me if you need anything." He then buried his face back into the pillow. I looked at the man I had once adored and devoted my life to. Now he lay there, utterly unaware of the devastating trap waiting to spring. I turned and walked away, my heart heavy, my resolve absolute. Instead of heading to the transport hub, I drove across town to the secluded estate of Mrs. Albright, my neighbor and fellow collector. She answered the door, her face a mask of polite concern. "Eleanor, you're up terribly early. Is something amiss?" she asked with genuine affection. I forced a tired smile. "Clara, I wonder if I might impose on you for a few hours. I need a quiet place to review some sensitive documents before my trip. And I need a clear view of my estate." She frowned slightly but, being a woman of old-school discretion, immediately agreed. She poured me a strong coffee and seated me in her private library, which offered a completely unobstructed, panoramic view of my house. I sat there, a silent observer. Around 10 a.m., a gleaming black sedan pulled up sharply in front of my estate. Lydia emerged, wearing a light, silk print dress and those huge, dark glasses, looking around furtively as if she feared recognition. George opened the front door, scanned the street quickly, and ushered her inside with a hurried, guilty urgency. I gripped my coffee cup, the heat a minor distraction from the cold knot in my stomach. "It's time," I whispered, and activated the specialized application on my phone, which was now connected to the recorder I had hidden in the bedroom. Through my secure headphones came the immediate sound, Lydia's throaty laughter, the clink of glasses, heavy footsteps, and then George's deep voice. "Now, my dear, no need to hide in that awful hotel suite. The house is ours for the day." Lydia giggled. "You certainly time things perfectly. That old hag is completely out of the picture, isn't she?" I bit my lip until I tasted blood, holding back the volcanic rage as I heard her cruel, dismissive slur. Then came the unmistakable, rhythmic creaking of the antique bed springs, followed by sounds I had meticulously prepared myself not to hear. I closed my eyes, took a long, steadying breath, and whispered, "Just a moment longer, Eleanor. Just a moment longer." Moments later, there was a sudden, blood-curdling shriek from Lydia. "What in God's name is this?" "George, we're stuck." Her voice was laced with pure, unadulterated panic. George roared, "Be quiet. Wait, let me look." I allowed myself a single, cold, triumphant smile. The industrial-grade polymer superglue I had swapped for the lubricant was now curing, performing its deadly, silent work. I barely touched my phone and activated the final stage, the remote trigger. The bronze doorstop slid off the ledge, pulling the fishing line sharply. The spirit lamp wick ignited. The oil-soaked rags caught fire instantly. A thick plume of black, greasy smoke immediately began billowing from my kitchen window, rising into the clear morning air like a dark, terrifying alarm. Mrs. Albright gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she looked out the library window. "Eleanor, your house is on fire." "My God, call the fire department." I feigned terror, but inside, I was eerily calm. Neighbors began spilling out of their houses, shouting in alarm. "The Roberts house is on fire. Call 911. Mr. Davies, a man who runs a security firm, immediately pulled out his phone and frantically dialed the local emergency services. I stayed seated, clutching my coffee, my eyes fixed on the house. Everything was moving precisely to my flawless, unforgiving schedule. The police are coming. The fire alarm is sounding. But the final, most devastating blow is about to be delivered by the one person George never expected. The whole neighborhood is watching. The price of betrayal is about to be paid. Just 10 agonizing minutes later, the wail of a siren split the silence. A large, crimson fire truck rounded the corner and skidded to a sharp, aggressive stop directly in front of my estate. I watched as Daniel, my son, in his heavy, protective fire chief uniform, leaped from the driver's seat, his face a grim mask of professional intensity. "Quickly. Deploy the thermal sensors. There may be occupants inside," he shouted, his voice firm. I looked at him, and a sharp, devastating pain finally pierced my composure. My son, the proud chief, was about to face the single cruelest truth of his life. I wanted to run, to pull him back, to scream, "I am so sorry, Daniel." But I remained frozen, allowing the inevitable to unfold. The thick black smoke from the kitchen continued to rise, giving Daniel and his team the necessary illusion of a serious structure fire. Daniel took the lead, wielding a heavy sledgehammer, and slammed it against the front door, the wood splintering with a deafening crack that echoed across the street. His team followed with hoses and thermal imaging gear. I listened to the growing, frantic commotion coming from the master bedroom through my headphones. George's desperate, muffled shouts mixed with Lydia's hysterical, rising sobs. "Do something, George. I can't move. I'm stuck." George roared back, "Stop screaming. I'm trying to pull free." I bit my lip, squeezing the phone. They were trapped, utterly helpless, exactly as I had calculated. Daniel entered the bedroom. I could visualize the scene with horrifying clarity, his own father and his wife, naked, grotesquely adhered to one another on the bed, their faces contorted in agony and abject terror. I wasn't there, but the sound was enough. Through my headphones, I heard Daniel's voice crack, utterly broken. "What in God's? What is this?" A firefighter immediately behind him murmured a shocked, low oath, "Jesus Christ." Another man couldn't stifle a nervous, explosive laugh, but Daniel instantly bellowed, "Silence. Secure the perimeter." I knew that command wasn't just about maintaining order, but Daniel's desperate, reflexive attempt to shield his pain and shame. The utter humiliation was now exposed, not just to Daniel, but to his entire squad, and to the rapidly gathering, whispering neighborhood. A firefighter ran back out to Daniel. "Chief, the smoke is minimal." It was a minor oil ignition. No structural damage. But Daniel did not reply. He was still in the bedroom, paralyzed by the horror of what he had witnessed. The neighbors were pouring onto the street, pointing and shouting. What happened? It's George and the daughter-in-law, a woman's voice shrieked with disbelief. How could they? Another cried. Mrs. Albright, beside me, subtly pulled out her phone and began recording, focusing the camera lens on the chaos at the front door. She looked at me, her eyes a complex mix of pity and furious validation. Eleanor, you knew, didn't you? I offered no reply. I simply gave the slightest, barely perceptible nod, my eyes locked on my house. The truth was now a wildfire, and I was ready to watch it burn them to ash. The final act of the trap is the most humiliating. George and Lydia are about to be exposed to the world, and they'll learn the truth about the superglue. The police are on the way, but not for the fire. Keep reading for the climax of the revenge. Just as the firefighters wrapped sheets around George and Lydia, attempting to shield their grotesquely adhered bodies, and prepared to carry them out on stretchers, I heard Lydia's hysterical, ragged sobs mixed with pained moans. Please, help me. I can't bear this pain. George weakly mumbled, don't let anyone see us. Close the door, Daniel. But it was far too late. The entire street was now a theater of shame, onlookers gasping, whispering, and pointing with revulsion. Father-in-law and daughter-in-law caught in the most unthinkable, humiliating position. Unbelievable, a man's voice cut through the air. The shame. Poor Eleanor. The firefighters had no choice but to lift the stretchers and carry them through the crowd, wrapped in the thin, inadequate cotton sheets. I heard Lydia's voice, choked with pain and raw terror. George just hung his head. They were carried out to the street, amidst the rising, disgusted murmurs of the community. What an utter disgrace. Adultery and incest. My God, how vile. The crowd was swelling, pointing and jeering, as the ambulance arrived and the medics prepared them for transport. Among the loud voices, I heard a man's explosive laughter. What a spectacle. I still can't believe two people could be so utterly depraved. An elderly woman shook her head, whispering to her son, poor Eleanor. He was a respected appraiser. They both deserve whatever they get. I stood there among the people, feigning shock, as if I had just rushed back from my supposed transport hub. Daniel stood motionless in the middle of the perfectly manicured lawn, his arms hanging limp, his face ashen, the color of wet plaster. His team avoided his gaze, quietly packing their equipment. I knew Daniel was not just paralyzed by the sight of his father and his wife stuck together, but by the absolute, cool devastation of the double betrayal by the two people he loved and trusted most in the world. I wanted to rush to him, to hold him and apologize for forcing him to witness this nightmare, but I held back. I walked, instead, behind Mrs. Albright, who silently escorted me to the hospital. We sat in the sterile, airless hallway on the third floor, maintaining the perfect facade of a concerned wife whose house had just suffered a small electrical fire. Hours later, a doctor emerged, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked at me, his voice low and professional. Mrs. Roberts, we managed the separation. Fortunately, no permanent damage, but significant friction burns. They require a topical anesthetic cream and a period of absolute rest. I nodded, feigning profound relief, while my fingers discreetly brushed against my satchel where I had hidden two carefully prepared tubes of my finest, aged, industrial-grade mustard paste. Thank you, doctor, I said, my voice shaking the perfect amount to hide my plan. May I see them? He led me to the nurse's station, where they handed me 2 tubes of burn ointment. The nurse, a kind young woman, looked at me with deep compassion. Ma'am, this is an unspeakably difficult situation. I am truly sorry for your ordeal. I offered a weak, grateful smile, and the instant she turned her back, I executed the switch, replacing the medical tubes with the mustard I carried. My hands were steady and quick, movements rehearsed 1,000 times in my mind. I entered the room, holding the tube of mustard, the picture of wifely concern. George, Lydia, are you both all right? Lydia was huddled on the bed, her face hidden, her eyes red, refusing to look at me. George, pale and weak, mumbled Eleanor, I can explain everything. But I cut him off. I gently placed the tubes of mustard on the bedside table and turned to leave. Minutes later, a single, blood-curdling scream erupted from the room. Lydia was clutching her face, weeping hysterically. It burns. My skin is on fire. George, what is this awful smell? George was writhing on the bed, cursing loudly. What the devil is this? Who did this to us? The entire hallway erupted in chaos. Patients and visitors spilled out to look. A small, elderly woman whispered to her daughter, "It's them. The couple from the internet video this morning. The father-in-law and the daughter-in-law. What utter filth." Another man added, "They got what they deserved. The whole neighborhood is talking." The doctor rushed back in, demanding the nurses clean the affected area and apply neutralizing cream. But the humiliation was already a public catastrophe, impossible to contain. Mrs. Albright's quick, steady video of their stretcher exit had already gone viral across local social media groups. I stood in the hallway, listening to the cacophony, feeling the entire world witness the downfall of these two traitors. The revenge is complete, but the final, devastating move remains: the legal and financial obliteration of George Roberts and his co-conspirator. Keep reading to see Eleanor reclaim her power and secure Daniel's future. When the chaos subsided, Daniel walked into the room, holding a thick, leather-bound folder. I had called him immediately after the ambulance left, asking him to retrieve the evidence I had secured in my desk drawer, and the 2 divorce petitions I had painstakingly prepared. He handed me the folder, his gaze utterly vacant, saying nothing. I opened it, took out the papers, and placed them precisely on the small table between George and Lydia. I looked directly into George's eyes, my voice cold, yet resonant with finality. 45 years of marriage ends right here, George. Sign these documents. Then, you may do whatever you wish, so long as you both vanish from my son's life and mine forever. Lydia collapsed into fresh tears, looking at Daniel. "Honey, please, forgive me. It was a mistake. A terrible moment of madness. Please, I beg you." But Daniel simply stared through her, his eyes like stone, and walked out of the room without a word. George lunged for my hand, his voice a pathetic tremor. "Eleanor, listen to me. It wasn't my idea. I didn't want this." I pulled my hand away, cutting him off with surgical precision. "Don't speak another word, George. You chose your path. Now you will suffer the consequences." He yelled desperately, "Eleanor, please." But a nurse rushed in and warned him sharply, "Silence. This is a hospital." I turned and walked out, without a single backward glance. In the hallway, I found Daniel leaning against the wall, his head buried in his hands. I walked over and placed my hand on his shoulder. He did not look up. "Mom," he whispered, his voice ravaged by grief. "Why did it have to be Dad? Why Lydia?" I offered no answer. I simply held him tightly, sharing the crushing weight of his pain. In that moment, I knew that George and Lydia had lost everything: their honor, their marriage, their vile financial plot. But Daniel and I had also lost a family, a false history we could never retrieve. I could only hope that, in time, we would find a fragile, hard-won peace. The final accounting is due. Eleanor's silver collection is safe, but there is one last piece of business with Thomas Sterling and the fate of the Byzantine icon. Keep reading for the final, empowering resolution. ****. A few short weeks after the public humiliation, my private atelier was busier than ever. The entry bell chimed constantly. Clients came and went with genuine, respectful smiles and sincere compliments. "Eleanor, you are a marvel," Mrs. Albright said, picking up a carefully wrapped piece of Roman glass. "The entire community is deeply proud of the way you defended your legacy and your family from that utter filth." I smiled and offered a simple, "Thank you." People saw me as a woman of immense strength, but only I knew that strength was forged in the fire of my broken heart. Every time I looked at the magnificent early American silver portfolio, now safely secured in my name, I remembered George and Lydia, who had tried to steal everything and had failed utterly. I still had my legacy. I still had Daniel. And most importantly, I still had myself. Daniel immediately moved back into the estate. He was quiet, avoiding the subject of the betrayal, but the change was profound. He was no longer the light-hearted, always joking son he used to be. His eyes held a deep, unhealed wound. "Mom, I need to be here for a while," he told me on the first night, his suitcase by his side. "I'm going to help you manage the atelier, handle the logistics, whatever you need." I embraced him fiercely. I felt the warmth of the sun I had successfully shielded, and I simply nodded. I knew Daniel needed time, and so did I. Every morning, we worked together. I prepared the delicate pieces for shipment, and Daniel managed the complex insurance paperwork and communicated with auction houses. "Mom, the Metropolitan is increasing their acquisition request for the Georgian-era pieces next quarter," he called out from my main desk, his voice calm, but lacking its former effervescence. "Affirmative," I replied. "Confirm the consignment. I will prepare the packing list." These simple, shared moments provided a profound sense of quiet security I hadn't felt in decades. There were no more false smiles from George, no more honeyed, treacherous tones from Lydia. It was only Daniel and me, painstakingly rebuilding what remained. Our dinners were now quiet, simple affairs. We sat in the kitchen, eating basic meals, sharing silent companionship. "Mom, could we look at the new Tiffany silver catalog this weekend?" he asked one night, offering a faint, small smile, the first I had seen in weeks. "Of course," I replied, relieved. "But you have to help me authenticate the provenance." He nodded, and in that moment, I felt a solid sense of recovery. I also began to allocate time for myself, something I had entirely neglected during my marriage. I joined a historic preservation club at the community center, where women my age shared local history and their own life stories. "Eleanor, your knowledge of colonial-era documentation is second to none," a woman remarked, laughing, when I presented a paper. I smiled, replying, "A trick I learned in the Boston archives." I also started attending a small, intimate church on Sundays. I would sit in the quiet light, praying not for vengeance, but for strength and peace for myself and Daniel. Sometimes, I would take long, intentional walks with Mrs. Albright through the historic district. "You know, Eleanor," she said one afternoon, her eyes shining with admiration. "Everyone is still talking about George and Lydia, but the consensus is you are the one who truly triumphed." I only smiled. Perhaps. But the cost had been the complete loss of a life I thought I had built. Daniel continued his slow, quiet recovery. He became less withdrawn, beginning to share details of his demanding work as fire chief. "We responded to a major alarm at the waterfront docks yesterday, Mom," he told me over dinner. "It was extremely dangerous, but we saved the entire historic pier." I listened, my heart swelling with immense pride. "Please be careful," I said, my voice barely steady. "You are all I have left." Daniel looked at me with immense tenderness. "Never fear, Mom. I will never leave you alone." Those words were a profound balm to my soul, reaffirming that despite the devastation, I still possessed the most precious thing in my life, my son. One quiet afternoon, as my atelier buzzed with activity, I sat at my main desk, watching the subtle movement of the city outside. The bell kept ringing. The rich scent of fine leather and aged paper filled the air. I looked at the shelves filled with my magnificent collection and reflected on my long, arduous journey. I had built this empire with my own resolve, rising from a simple enthusiast to a formidable force in the antique world. George and Lydia tried to take it all, and they failed. I kept my legacy. I kept Daniel. And most importantly, I kept my self-respect. Final conclusion: what happened to George and Lydia? And what did Eleanor do with the infamous superglue? Don't miss this final reveal. **** The shame was a suffocating shroud that clung to George and Lydia long after the hospital released them. George was forced to resign from all his prestigious board positions, and his renowned appraisal consortium was instantly dissolved, his reputation irrevocably destroyed by the viral video. The community, the very elite he craved, shunned him. Lydia, unable to face the relentless humiliation, filed for divorce from Daniel a week after the hospital incident. Daniel agreed without contest, his silence a more potent weapon than any legal filing. They lost everything, their social standing, their careers, and the grotesque dream of seizing my wealth. As for the infamous superglue, Mr. Sterling quietly recovered the empty tube from the Mercedes glove compartment shortly after the incident. I instructed him to have it analyzed and then disposed of in the industrial waste stream, a final, silent burial of the betrayal. Mr. Sterling, having secured his sizable fee, also informed me of a crucial detail he'd uncovered while tracking George's original movements. The Byzantine icon he purchased in Charleston was not an antique at all. It was an elaborate, counterfeit piece, designed solely to act as a dummy asset in the initial legal documents George and Lydia were preparing, intended to distract and confuse my legal team while they targeted the real wealth, my early American silver portfolio. The sheer cunning of their financial plots solidified my decision that my revenge was not only justified but necessary for my survival. I closed the investigation with Mr. Sterling and immediately secured my entire collection under an ironclad, irrevocable trust in Daniel's name. I never spoke to George or Lydia again. They vanished, swallowed by their shame, forced to live in the obscurity of a disgraced reputation. My life, however, continued. My atelier flourished. Daniel and I now work side by side every day, his presence a constant source of quiet joy. We rebuilt a new, honest family foundation, free of deceit and ambition. If you've been following my story, you know that strength is not found in the value of the silver you hold, but in the resolve of the heart that refuses to break. Did you enjoy my story of finding justice? Which part of this devastating betrayal shocked you the most? Let's discuss it in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of resolve and resilience, and thank you immensely for your sweet support.